Tonight we step into the smoky haze of a Mughal kitchen as the sun drops behind the sandstone walls of Fate Pasikri, the air thick with the scent of sizzling ghee and crushed cardamom, and you realize you have exactly 30 seconds to identify a smuggled spice pod before the Emperor's taster notices you don't belong here. You probably won't survive this if you're caught, but the kitchens are the only place where a stranger can blend in, where every face is streaked with sweat and every hand is moving too fast to question the presence of another. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You slip through the arched doorway and the heat hits you like a wall, a thick blanket of steam and smoke that carries 1,000 competing aromas. To your left, a boy no older than 12 fans glowing coals beneath a massive copper pot, his face illuminated in the orange glow, while behind him a man in a simple cotton tunic grinds something dark and fragrant on a slab of black stone, the rhythmic scrape of stone on stone a constant backdrop to the chaos. You press yourself against the cool tile wall and just breathe for a moment, letting your eyes adjust to the dim light, because this is not a kitchen in any sense you understand. This is an engine, a machine designed to produce pleasure on a scale that borders on the absurd, and you are standing in the middle of it. The Emperor, they whisper, has a sweet tooth that could bankrupt a smaller kingdom. His favorite snack is not some grand feast with dozens of courses, not roasted peacocks or stuffed lambs, but something smaller, more intimate, a dish that requires precision rather than abundance. And tonight, you've heard, the head cook is preparing it, and he needs something he cannot find in the royal stores, something that must be smuggled past the guards who search every sack of grain and every basket of dried fruit that enters the palace grounds. That something, you realize as a man brushes past you with urgent purpose, is a single pod, no larger than your thumb, wrapped in oiled cloth and pressed into your palm with a whispered instruction you barely catch. The pod is wrinkled and pale green, and you can feel through the cloth the faint ridges of the seeds inside. You don't know what it is yet, not really, only that it matters, that this tiny thing has traveled farther than you have, has crossed mountains and seas and the borders of hostile kingdoms to reach this moment. You tuck it into the fold of your waistcloth and step deeper into the kitchen, because standing still draws attention, and attention is the last thing you need. Around you, the work continues with a rhythm that feels almost choreographed. Women in bright oddness sit cross-legged on the floor, picking through mounds of rice grain by grain, their fingers moving with the speed of long practice, while above them, suspended from iron hooks, hang chains of brass pots bubbling with things you cannot identify. A man carries a platter piled high with marinated meat toward a tandoor oven sunk into the floor, its mouth gaping like a portal to another world, and you watch as he slaps the skewers against the inner wall, the meat hissing as it meets the heat. The smell makes your stomach clench, but you cannot stop, cannot let yourself be distracted, because somewhere in this labyrinth of steam and spice, the Emperor's favorite snack is taking shape, and you are meant to deliver its final, secret ingredient. You weave between stations, past a boy churning buttermilk in a tall earthen pot, past a woman rolling thin flatbreads and slapping them onto a convex iron griddle, past a corner where someone is pounding something in a massive stone mortar with a rhythm like a heartbeat. The sound of the kitchen is overwhelming, a constant roar of voices and clanging metal and sizzling fat, but underneath it all there is a quieter noise, a sort of hum, the sound of many people working in close proximity, breathing together, existing together in this hot, dark space. And then you see him, the head cook, a massive man with forearms like ropes and a face that shows no emotion whatsoever. He stands at a low table, his back to you, his hands moving over a spread of ingredients with the deliberation of a general surveying a battlefield. You see mounds of pale green pistachios, their shells split to reveal the purple skin beneath, and heaps of almonds blanched and slivered into perfect matchsticks. There are silver bowls filled with what looks like snow but is probably sugar, ground finer than any you've ever seen, and next to them, a stack of thin gold leaf, so delicate that the breath from his nostrils makes the edges flutter. You step closer, and he turns. His eyes scan you once, twice, and then drop to the bulge in your waistcloth where the pod hides. He holds out his hand, palm up, and says nothing. You reach into your cloth, pull out the oiled package, and place it in his palm. He weighs it for a moment, then nods, once, and turns back to his table without a word of thanks or acknowledgement. You have done your part, delivered what was asked, and now you are invisible again, free to watch, free to learn, free to stand in the corner and observe as the Emperor's favorite snack begins its final journey from raw ingredient to finished dish. The cook unwraps the cloth and holds the pod up to the light. It is pale green, almost white in places, and you can see now that it is slightly curved, like a miniature banana, with tiny ridges running along its length. He takes a small knife and splits it open, and the aroma that escapes is so sudden, so intense, that you actually step back. It is sweet and floral and something else, something green and fresh that cuts through the heavy kitchen air like a blade. Inside the pod are dozens of small black seeds, each one glistening with moisture, and the cook scrapes them out with the tip of his knife and adds them to a small copper bowl where something pale and creamy is already waiting. You watch as he stirs, the black seeds dispersing into the white, and you realize you have no idea what you just smuggled. No idea what this dish is called or why it matters so much to a man who rules over millions. But you know, with the certainty of someone who has just touched history, that you will never forget this moment, this kitchen, this smell. The cook lifts the bowl and holds it out to a young boy, who takes it carefully in both hands and begins walking toward a curtained doorway at the far end of the kitchen. The boy disappears, and the curtain falls back into place, and the kitchen continues its roar around you as if nothing has happened. But something has happened. Something has begun. And you are still standing there, breathing in the fading scent of that open pod, when a hand grips your arm and a voice whispers in your ear that the Emperor wishes to see the man who brought the spice. You turn, and the hand releases, and you are looking into the face of a palace guard who shows no expression at all. The guard leads you not toward the curtained doorway where the boy disappeared but deeper into the warren of kitchens, past storage rooms stuffed with sacks of grain and hanging bunches of dried limes, past a courtyard where goats are being slaughtered according to halal ritual, their blood running in thin rivulets toward a central drain. You follow in silence, your heart beating somewhere in your throat, because being summoned by an emperor is rarely a neutral event, and you still don't fully understand what you carried or why it mattered so much. The guard stops at a narrow stairwell cut into the sandstone, gestures for you to ascend, and then vanishes back into the chaos below, leaving you alone with nothing but the flicker of oil lamps on the rough walls and the distant sound of evening prayers beginning somewhere in the city. You climb. The stairs are steep and uneven, worn smooth by centuries of feet you cannot see, and the air grows cooler as you rise, the kitchen heat giving way to something almost pleasant. At the top, a curtain of heavy velvet blocks your path, and you hesitate, because beyond this curtain is a world you were never meant to enter, a world of silk and marble and absolute power. You part the fabric and step through. The room is small by palace standards, intimate even, with a low divan piled with cushions and a single window carved into the stone that frames the setting sun like a painting. The walls are decorated with intricate geometric patterns picked out in gold leaf, and the floor is covered with a carpet so fine you can see the individual knots that form its sprawling floral design. But you barely notice any of this, because seated on the divan, his legs crossed and his hands resting on his knees, is a man who can only be the emperor. He is younger than you expected, perhaps 30, with a trimmed beard and intelligent eyes that miss nothing. He wears simple white cotton, unadorned except for a single emerald ring on his right hand, and he is watching you with an expression that might be curiosity or might be something far more dangerous. Beside him, on a low table of inlaid marble, sits the copper bowl you saw the boy carry from the kitchen. The pale contents have been portioned into a smaller vessel, and next to it rests a silver spoon and a small dish of what looks like crushed pistachios. The emperor follows your gaze to the bowl and smiles, a small, private smile that transforms his face from imperial mask to something almost human. "You brought the saffron," he says. His voice is quiet, but it fills the room entirely. Do you know what saffron is? You shake your head, because you don't, because the pod you carried was pale green and the seeds inside were black, and none of this matches anything you've ever heard about a spice that costs more than gold. The emperor laughs, a genuine laugh that seems to surprise him as much as it surprises you. No, he says. Of course you don't. You carried it, but you didn't know what it was. That is the way of things, isn't it? We carry what we do not understand, deliver it to those who do, and the world continues turning. He gestures to the cushion across from him. Sit. Eat with me. I find that food tastes better when shared with someone who has never tasted it before. You sit, because refusing an emperor is not an option, and he pushes the small bowl toward you. You lift the spoon, dip it into the pale mixture, and bring it to your lips. The first thing you notice is the texture, smooth and cool, almost like thickened cream. Then the sweetness hits, delicate and complex, followed immediately by something else, something floral and slightly bitter that lingers on your tongue and seems to expand, filling your entire mouth with an aroma you cannot name. You close your eyes, and for a moment you are somewhere else entirely, standing in a field of purple flowers under a mountain sun, the air so thick with scent you could drink it. That, the emperor says, is saffron. Not the powder you may have seen, not the cheap imitations that traders try to pass off as the real thing. That is true saffron, from the valleys of Kashmir, carried across mountains that would kill most men, harvested by hand from flowers that bloom for exactly 2 weeks each autumn. Each thread you just tasted was picked before dawn, dried in the shade, and transported in sealed containers to preserve every molecule of flavor. What you just experienced is not merely a spice. It is the distilled essence of a place, a people, a season. He takes a small bite himself, closing his eyes as he does, and you watch his face soften in a way that makes him look almost vulnerable. When he opens his eyes again, they are focused on the window, on the fading light beyond. Kashmir, he says, is the most beautiful place on earth. I have never seen it myself, not yet, but my father described it to me when I was a boy, and I have carried his words ever since. He spoke of lakes the color of turquoise, ringed by mountains so tall they wear snow even in summer. He spoke of houseboats and floating gardens and orchards where the apples hang so thick the branches bend to the water. And he spoke of the saffron fields, acres of purple stretching to the foothills, each flower worth more than its weight in silver because of what it carries inside. He pauses, and you realize he is no longer speaking to you, not really. He is speaking to himself, or to the memory of his father, or to the empire he now rules but has not yet fully seen. You stay silent, because some moments demand silence, and this is one of them. But Kashmir is also, he continues, his voice shifting, becoming harder, the most contested place on earth. Every empire that has ever risen in this part of the world has tried to claim it, to hold it, to keep others from taking it. The mountains that make it beautiful also make it defensible, and the passes that lead into it are littered with the bones of armies that thought they could simply walk in and take what they wanted. My grandfather fought for Kashmir. My father fought for Kashmir. And I, it seems, will spend my entire reign fighting for Kashmir as well, because the moment we stop, someone else will start. He looks at you directly, and you see something in his eyes that wasn't there before, a weariness that seems older than his years. Historians still argue whether the Mughals conquered Kashmir for its beauty, its strategic position, or simply because we could not bear the thought of anyone else possessing it. The truth, I suspect, is simpler and more human than any of those theories. We conquered Kashmir because it was there, because it was lovely, because we wanted it. And now we cannot let it go, because letting go would mean admitting that some things cannot be held forever. You look down at the empty bowl, at the faint orange stain left by the saffron on its white ceramic surface, and you understand that you have just eaten something that cost more than your life is worth, something that traveled through war zones and over mountain passes, something that represents not just flavor but the entire weight of an empire's ambition. The emperor follows your gaze and smiles again, the private smile. You are wondering, he says, why I share this with you. Why I tell a stranger the things I tell my closest advisors. The answer is simple. Because you are a stranger. You will leave this room and you will go back to your life, wherever that is, and you will carry this memory with you, but you will not use it against me. You have no army, no political ambition, no claim to my throne. You are, in the truest sense, a safe person to talk to. And sometimes, even an emperor needs someone safe to talk to. He reaches into a small box beside him and withdraws a single thread of saffron, holding it up so you can see its 3 delicate stigmas, the deep red that will become orange when steeped, the tiny yellow tip where it was plucked from the flower. This thread, he says, was picked by a woman in a village called Pampor, on the banks of a river I have never seen. She woke before dawn, walked into the fields while her children slept, and bent over thousands of flowers to collect the few that had bloomed that morning. Her fingers are stained purple for the season. Her back aches by midday. And she does this for wages that would not buy you a meal in this city. But she also does something else, something she may not even realize. She connects me to that place, to that valley, to the mountains and the lakes and the people I rule but cannot visit. Every time I taste her saffron, I am in Kashmir. Every time I close my eyes and let the flavor spread across my tongue, I am home in a place I have never been. He places the thread back in the box and closes the lid, and you understand that the audience is over. You rise, bow, and move toward the curtain, but his voice stops you at the threshold. Remember, he says, that spices are not just flavors. They are stories. They are places and people and histories compressed into something small enough to hold in your hand. The next time you taste something, ask yourself where it came from, who grew it, how it traveled to your plate. The answer may surprise you. The answer may change you. You step through the curtain and descend the stairs, and behind you, in the small room with the golden walls and the fading light, the emperor of half the world sits alone with his saffron and his memories, waiting for the night to fall. You descend the stairs in a daze, the taste of saffron still lingering on your tongue, and before you've taken 3 steps into the kitchen's chaos, a hand closes around your wrist and pulls you sideways through a low doorway you hadn't noticed before. You stumble into a small storeroom lined with clay jars and hanging bundles of dried herbs, the air so thick with competing aromas it makes your eyes water. The person who pulled you here is a woman, middle-aged, with sharp eyes and hair pulled back so tightly it stretches the skin at her temples. She releases your wrist and crosses her arms, studying you with an intensity that makes you want to confess to something, anything, just to break the silence. You ate with him, she says. It's not a question. You nod, because there's no point in denying what she clearly already knows. And he talked to you. About Kashmir, about the saffron, about his father. She pauses, waiting for confirmation, and you nod again. She sighs, a sound that carries the weight of years, and uncrosses her arms to gesture at a low stool in the corner. Sit. If you're going to be wandering around this kitchen, you should at least understand what you're seeing. Otherwise you'll get yourself killed before sunset tomorrow, and I've already buried too many fools this year. You sit, and she settles onto an overturned crate across from you, her hands resting on her knees in a posture that reminds you oddly of the emperor himself. For a long moment she just looks at you, and you look back, and the only sound is the muffled roar of the kitchen through the storeroom's thin walls. My name is Meru Nissa, she finally says. I've been running this kitchen for 12 years, through 2 emperors and 3 famines and more assassination attempts than I care to count. I know every spice in this palace by sight, by smell, by taste, by the sound it makes when it hits hot oil. And I know, looking at you, that you have no idea what you're doing here. She reaches behind her and pulls down a small clay pot, unstopping it and tipping a few pale green pods into her palm. They're smaller than the saffron pod you carried, rounder, with a ridged surface that catches the lamplight. She holds one out to you, and you take it, feeling its weight, its cool smoothness against your skin. Cardamom, she says. The queen of the spice chest, or so the poets call it. Open it. You press your thumbnail into the seam, and the pod cracks with a tiny pop, releasing an aroma so immediately familiar it stops your breath. It's the smell you noticed when you first entered the kitchen, the one that cut through the smoke and steam and announced itself as something special. Inside the pod are dozens of small black seeds, clustered together like dark jewels, each one glistening with essential oils. Green cardamom, Meru Nissa continues. There's another kind, black cardamom, that comes from the eastern hills, but we don't use it here. Too smoky, too harsh for the emperor's palate. He prefers the green, the true cardamom, the one that grows only in the mountains of the Malabar coast, where the monsoon rains hit first and hardest. Put a seed on your tongue. You do, and the flavor explodes, cool and hot at the same time, minty and floral and somehow also woody, with a sweetness that builds slowly and then fades into something almost medicinal. It's unlike anything you've ever tasted, and you must make a face, because Meru Nissa laughs, a genuine laugh that transforms her severe features into something almost warm. Too much? She asks. Yes, it's always too much at first. Cardamom doesn't do subtle. It announces itself, demands attention, refuses to be ignored. That's why the emperor loves it. That's why it goes into almost everything he eats, from his morning tea to his evening rice. He says it reminds him that life is supposed to be tasted, not just swallowed. She takes the cracked pod from your hand and examines it, turning it over in her calloused fingers. This one came from a village called Munnar, high in the Travancore hills. Do you know how it got here? Do you know what it took to bring this tiny pod from those misty slopes to this storeroom? You shake your head, and she settles more comfortably on her crate, settling in for a story she's clearly told before. The cardamom grows in the shade, she begins. It needs the forest, needs the tall trees to protect it from the direct sun, needs the constant moisture of the monsoon to thrive. The people who tend it live in the hills year-round, whole families who've been growing cardamom for generations. They know the plants individually, know which ones will produce the best pods, know exactly when to harvest. Not too early, when the flavor hasn't developed, and not too late, when the pods split and the seeds scatter. She pauses, her eyes distant, seeing something you cannot. The harvest happens in autumn, after the rains have passed. Whole villages empty as everyone moves into the cardamom groves, picking pods by hand, one by one, because the plants are too delicate for any kind of mechanical harvesting. The pods are washed in mountain streams, then dried slowly over low fires, then sorted by size and color and quality. Only the best, the greenest, the most aromatic, are packed into sealed baskets and sent down the mountains toward the coast. And from there, you guess, they travel here. Eventually, Meru Nissa agrees. But first they travel to the ports, to Calicut and Cochin, where they're weighed and taxed and inspected by officials who've spent their entire careers learning to spot counterfeit cardamom. Then they're loaded onto ships or into caravans, depending on the season and the political situation, and they begin the long journey north. They cross rivers and mountains and borders, passing through the lands of kings who would happily steal them if they could. They change hands a dozen times, each trader adding his own markup, his own story, his own claim to have sourced the very finest quality. She leans forward, her eyes sharp again. And here's the thing you need to understand. Every single person in that chain, from the hill farmer to the port official to the caravan leader to the palace buyer, takes a risk. The farmer risks crop failure, or bandits, or a bad monsoon. The trader risks robbery, or shipwreck, or a sudden war that closes the trade routes. The buyer risks being cheated, paying too much for inferior goods, losing his position if the emperor detects even a hint of lower quality. And all of them, every one of them, knows that the entire enterprise depends on something they cannot control, the rain. She reaches for another cardamom pod, rolling it between her fingers. The cardamom needs the monsoon, needs the clouds that build over the ocean and travel hundreds of miles inland, needs the weeks of relentless rain that soak the mountains and keep the groves moist. If the monsoon comes late, the pods don't develop properly. If it comes early, they rot on the plant. If it's too weak, the plants dry out and produce nothing. If it's too strong, the hillsides slide and the groves are buried. The entire cardamom trade, worth more than most kingdoms, hangs on the whim of the weather. She tosses the pod back into the pot and stoppers it, the sound final in the small room. Historians still argue whether the Mughal Empire expanded south because we wanted the spice ports or because we wanted to control the sources themselves. Some say it was always about the pepper, the black gold that everyone craved. Others claim it was the cardamom, the queen's spice, that drew us into those mountains. The truth is probably messier, probably involved equal parts greed and ambition and simple curiosity about what lay beyond the next river. But one thing is certain, without the monsoon, without that annual miracle of clouds and rain, none of it would exist. No empire, no spice trade, no emperor sitting in his palace eating snacks that cost more than a farmer's annual wage. She stands, and you stand with her, sensing that the lesson is over. But she pauses at the door, looking back at you with an expression you can't quite read. The emperor told you that spices are stories, she says. He's right, of course. He usually is. But he didn't tell you the whole truth. Spices are also gambles. Every time you taste cardamom, you're tasting the risk that someone took to get it here. The farmer who planted without knowing if the rains would come. The trader who crossed bandit territory with his life savings in a single basket. The buyer who staked his reputation on a single purchase. That's what you're really tasting when you crack open a pod. Not just flavor. Not just place. But the hope that this time, this year, this season, the gamble would pay off. She pushes through the door and disappears into the kitchen's chaos, leaving you alone in the storeroom with the scent of cardamom and the weight of everything she said. You emerge from the storeroom blinking against the kitchen's smoke and find that the chaos has shifted into a new rhythm. The evening meal is being assembled, and the pace has intensified, bodies moving faster, voices sharper, the clang of copper pots more urgent. You press yourself against a pillar and watch, because watching is the only way to learn, and you have the distinct feeling that your education in this place has only just begun. A man brushes past you carrying a leather sack the size of his torso, and you catch a glimpse of what's inside before he disappears into the crowd. Small dark spheres, thousands of them, shifting and settling with a sound like heavy rain. You follow without thinking, because something about those spheres pulls at you, something ancient and familiar, and you need to know what they are. The man dumps the sack's contents onto a low wooden table, and the spheres spread out in a dark wave, covering the surface completely. They're peppercorns, you realize, but not like any you've seen before. These are larger, darker, more uniform, each one perfectly round and deeply wrinkled, with an almost metallic sheen in the lamplight. The man begins sorting them, pushing aside any that are broken or discolored, his fingers moving with the speed of someone who has done this 10,000 times. You're back. Merunissa's voice comes from behind you, and you turn to find her holding a small copper cup filled with steaming liquid. She offers it to you, and you take it, the warmth seeping through the metal into your palms. Drink, she says. It's just spiced milk. You look like you need it. You sip, and the familiar warmth of cardamom greets you, along with something else, something deeper and darker that spreads through your chest like a slow fire. Pepper, you realize. There's pepper in this milk. Black gold, Merunissa says, nodding toward the table where the man continues his sorting. That's what we call it here. What everyone calls it, from the ports of Malabar to the markets of Cairo to the palaces of Rome. Black gold. The spice that launched 1,000 ships and started 100 wars and made more fortunes than all the rubies in Golconda. She leads you closer to the table, and you stand over the mound of peppercorns, watching the light play across their wrinkled surfaces. They seem almost alive, these tiny spheres, each one containing a universe of heat and flavor. Tell me, Merunissa says, what do you know about pepper? You think for a moment, searching your memory for anything useful. It comes from the south, you offer. It's expensive. People use it to preserve meat, to cover the taste of meat that's gone bad. Merunissa snorts, a sound of profound contempt. That's what the Europeans say. That's their excuse for why they need so much of it, why they're willing to sail to the ends of the earth and fight anyone who gets in their way. They claim they need pepper to make their rotten meat edible. As if anyone with actual taste would ruin good pepper by putting it on bad meat. She reaches into the pile and pulls out a single peppercorn, holding it up between thumb and forefinger. This isn't about preservation. It never was. This is about pleasure. This is about the way your mouth comes alive when you bite down and the heat releases, spreading across your tongue like a slow wave. This is about the fact that humans, all humans, everywhere, crave sensation. We want to feel something. We want to be reminded that we're alive. And pepper, more than almost anything else, does that. She places the peppercorn in your palm and closes your fingers around it. Hold that. Feel its weight. Know that this single peppercorn, this tiny thing you could lose in the fold of your garment without noticing, is worth more than most people earn in a day. Know that the ship that carried it here faced storms and pirates and the constant threat of sinking. Know that the men who grew it, who tended the vines and harvested the berries and dried them in the sun, will never taste it themselves because they cannot afford what they produce. You open your fingers and look at the peppercorn, really look at it, and for the first time you understand what the emperor meant when he said spices are stories. This tiny sphere contains within it the entire history of the Malabar coast, the monsoon winds that carried Arab dhows to its shores, the temples and palaces built with pepper profits, the Portuguese ships that arrived a few decades ago and changed everything. The Portuguese, you say, and Merunissa's expression darkens. Yes, the Portuguese. She spits the word like a curse. They arrived when I was a girl, sailing into Calicut with their cannons and their crosses and their insatiable hunger for our spices. At first we didn't know what to make of them. They seemed almost comic, these pale men in their strange clothes, making signs and speaking a language no one understood. But then they started demanding things. Demanding exclusive trading rights. Demanding that we stop doing business with the Arabs who had traded here for centuries. Demanding that we recognize their king as somehow superior to our own. She gestures at the pile of peppercorns. And they wanted this. They wanted it more than anything. They looked at these tiny black spheres and saw the fortune that would let them build empires, fund wars, spread their religion across the world. They weren't interested in cardamom or cinnamon or cloves, not at first. They wanted pepper. Black gold. The thing that every European with money craved. A young boy runs up to Merunissa, whispers something in her ear, and runs off again. She nods, then turns back to you. There's a man you need to meet, she says. He's in the corner, the one grinding spices by the big mortar. Go talk to him. Tell him I sent you. And whatever you do, don't mention the Portuguese. He has feelings about the Portuguese. She disappears into the crowd before you can ask anything else, and you're left standing with your cooling cup of spiced milk and a single peppercorn still warm from your palm. You slip the peppercorn into a fold of your garment, the same place where you hid the saffron pod what feels like a lifetime ago, and make your way toward the corner where a massive stone mortar dominates the space. The man working there is old, older than anyone you've seen in the kitchen, with skin like worn leather and hands that seem permanently stained brown. He's grinding something with a heavy stone pestle, a rhythmic motion that seems almost meditative, and he doesn't look up as you approach. You stand beside him for a long moment, watching the spice beneath his pestle transform from whole seeds to coarse powder to something almost fine. Meru Nissa sent me, you say. He doesn't stop grinding, doesn't acknowledge your presence at all, and you're about to repeat yourself when he speaks without looking up. I heard her. I'm old, not deaf. His voice is a rasp, worn thin by years of kitchen smoke and shouting over noise. What do you want? I want to understand Pepper. He stops grinding. The silence that follows is sudden and complete, broken only by the distant roar of the kitchen around you. Slowly, deliberately, he sets down the pestle and turns to face you. His eyes are pale, almost colorless, and they study you with an intensity that makes you want to look away. Everyone wants to understand pepper, he says. No one wants to understand the people who grow it. No one wants to understand what it costs to bring it here. They just want the heat on their tongue, the warmth in their belly, the status of being able to afford it. He gestures at the mortar, at the dark powder coating its interior. This came from a village called Cardamom, in the hills east of Cochin. I know because I was born there, because my father grew pepper on that hillside, and his father before him, and his father before him, back to a time before anyone remembers. We've been growing pepper for longer than the Mughal Empire has existed, longer than the Delhi Sultanate, longer than any of the kingdoms that have risen and fallen on this subcontinent. And now I sit here, in the emperor's kitchen, grinding the pepper my family grew, because the Portuguese made it impossible to stay. He picks up a handful of peppercorns and lets them trickle through his fingers, watching them fall with an expression you can't quite read. Historians still argue whether the Portuguese arrival was inevitable, whether someone would have eventually found the sea route to India and changed everything. Some say it was only a matter of time, that the spice trade was too valuable to remain in Arab and Gujarati hands forever. Others claim it was an accident, that Vasco da Gama was looking for a Christian kingdom in the east and stumbled onto the Malabar coast by mistake. The truth is probably somewhere in between, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that they came, and they stayed, and they're not leaving. He resumes his grinding, the pestle moving in the same rhythmic pattern as before. They control the seas now. They demand that every ship carry a cartaz, a pass from their governor, or they sink it. They've built forts at Cochin and Cananore and Calicut, and they're building more. They've made alliances with some of our local rulers and enemies with others, and they play us against each other like pieces on a chessboard. And through it all, they take our pepper. They take it by the shipload, by the ton, by the thousands of sacks, and they sail it back to Lisbon and from there to the rest of Europe, where people pay fortunes for the privilege of tasting what we've grown for centuries. He looks up at you, and there's something in his eyes that might be sadness or might be rage, it's hard to tell. So yes, you want to understand pepper. Fine. Understand this. Pepper is power. It always has been. The Romans paid for it in gold, and when the Roman Empire fell, the people who controlled the trade routes to India became rich beyond imagining. The Arabs controlled it for centuries, and their cities grew fat on the profits. Then the Portuguese figured out how to bypass the middlemen, and now they control it, and their king calls himself Lord of the Conquest, Navigation, and Commerce of Ethiopia, Arabia, Persia, and India. That's what pepper does. It makes men think they can own the world. He falls silent, and the only sound is the grinding of stone on stone, the slow transformation of whole peppercorns into the powder that will season an emperor's food. You stand there for a long time, watching, learning, understanding that the heat on your tongue carries with it the weight of empires and the tears of those who grow it but can never afford to taste it. The old man's grinding continues its rhythm long after you've stopped watching, a heartbeat of stone on stone that seems to underscore everything happening in the kitchen. You leave him to his work and wander deeper into the labyrinth, past stations where breads are being slapped onto hot griddles and vegetables are being chopped with rhythmic precision, past a corner where someone is tending a massive pot of rice so large it requires a ladder to stir. Your mind is still full of pepper, of empires and oceans and the tiny spheres that move the world, when a new scent cuts through the kitchen's fog and stops you mid-stride. It's sweet and woody and somehow warm, like baking bread but more complex, with an edge of something almost medicinal. You follow your nose to a small alcove where a man sits cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by bundles of what look like dried bark. He's peeling thin strips from a larger piece, his knife moving with surgical precision, and as each strip falls away it releases another wave of that intoxicating aroma. "Cinnamon," you say, and the man looks up, startled. You know it. His accent is different from the others, softer, with longer vowels that stretch his words like taffy. "Only by reputation," you admit. "I've never actually seen it before." He smiles, a gap-toothed grin that transforms his weathered face. "Then you're in for a treat. Sit. Watch. Learn. That's what you're here for, isn't it? To learn." You sit, because apparently everyone in this kitchen expects you to sit and learn, and you're beginning to understand that this is how things work here. The man hands you a thin strip of the bark, still slightly warm from being near his body, and gestures for you to taste. You bring it to your lips and bite down gently, and the flavor floods your mouth so suddenly you almost choke. It's sweet, yes, but also sharp, with a heat that builds slowly and a complexity that seems to unfold in layers. There's something floral underneath, something almost like rose, and something else, something dark and woody that anchors the whole experience. "That," the man says, "is true cinnamon. Not cassia. Not the cheap stuff they try to pass off in the markets. Real cinnamon, from the island of Serendib, carried across the ocean by men who risk their lives every time they set sail." He holds up a larger piece of bark, showing you how thin it is, how many delicate layers it contains. The Portuguese call it canela. The Arabs call it darkini. We call it karundu, which means something like the rolled one, because that's what it does when it dries. It curls in on itself, protecting its secret, keeping its flavor locked away until someone cracks it open. You look more closely at the bark, at the way it has indeed curled into quills, each one a tight scroll of flavor waiting to be unrolled. "You said Serendib. That's an island, yes? Far to the south." "Far to the south," he agrees. "So far that most people don't believe it exists. They think it's a myth, a story traders tell to explain where cinnamon comes from. And for centuries, that's exactly what we wanted them to think." He leans forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially, though there's no one nearby to overhear. "You want to know the greatest secret of the spice trade? The lie that made more fortunes than any other? It's the story of where cinnamon comes from. For thousands of years, the traders who controlled the cinnamon trade told everyone that it grew in places no one could reach. They said it came from valleys guarded by winged creatures, from cliffs too steep to climb, from swamps where deadly snakes nested. They said anything and everything to keep people from looking too closely, from following the trade routes back to their source." He chuckles, a dry sound like rustling leaves. "The Greeks believed it. Herodotus, the great historian, wrote that cinnamon sticks were collected from the nests of giant birds, that the birds built their nests on cliffs and the only way to get the cinnamon was to lure them away with pieces of meat. Can you imagine? Giant birds building nests out of cinnamon? And people believed it. They paid fortunes for cinnamon, and they believed it came from bird nests. But it doesn't, you say. It comes from trees. From an island. From an island called Serendib, he confirms, which the Arabs call Sarandib and the Greeks called Taprobane and you might know as Ceylon. It's a real place, with real trees, and for centuries the people who lived there kept it secret. They traded cinnamon with the world, but they never told anyone where it came from. They let the myths grow, let the stories spread, because every myth made cinnamon more valuable, every story made people want it more. He picks up another quill, rolling it between his palms. The trees grow in the southwestern part of the island, in a region called Matara. They're not like other trees, not tall and straight. They're more like bushes, really, sending up shoots that are cut twice a year, after the monsoons. The outer bark is scraped away, and then the inner bark is cut in long strips and left to dry. As it dries, it curls. That's the quill you're holding. That's what the giant birds were supposed to be nesting with. You look at the quill in your hand with new respect, understanding that you're holding not just a spice but a millennia-old secret, a lie so successful that it shaped the way an entire civilization understood the world. And now, you ask, now that the Portuguese have found the island? His expression darkens, the amusement fading. Now the secret is out. The Portuguese arrived in Serendib about 40 years ago, and they didn't come to trade. They came to conquer. They saw the cinnamon forests and they wanted them, wanted to control every quill, wanted to be the ones selling to the world instead of buying from middlemen. They made deals with the local kings, broke them, made new deals, broke those too. Now they have a fort at Colombo, and they're trying to take control of the whole cinnamon trade. He sets down the quill and looks at you directly. Historians still argue whether the cinnamon trade would have remained secret forever if the Portuguese hadn't found the sea route to India. Some say it was only a matter of time, that the pressure to find the source was too great, that someone would eventually follow the trade routes back to their origin. Others claim the secret could have lasted centuries longer, that the traders who controlled it were skilled enough to keep it hidden indefinitely. The truth is probably that it doesn't matter now. The secret is out. The giant birds are dead. And the world knows where cinnamon comes from. He gestures at the bundles around him. This batch came from Serendib on the last ship before the monsoon. It traveled through Portuguese-controlled waters, past their forts and their patrols, and it reached the Malabar coast thanks to a captain who knew when to sail and when to hide. From there it came overland, through the kingdoms of the south, past bandits and tax collectors and officials who wanted their share. And now it's here, in the Emperor's kitchen, about to become part of a snack that will be eaten in a few minutes and forgotten by tomorrow. That seems... You search for the right word. Sad. That something that traveled so far, that survived so much, will disappear so quickly. The man laughs, a genuine laugh that fills the small alcove. That's the beauty of it, my friend. That's what spices do. They give everything they have in a single moment, and then they're gone. The cinnamon doesn't care that it traveled across oceans. It doesn't care about the secrets and the lies and the fortunes made from its existence. All it cares about is releasing its flavor, filling someone's mouth with warmth and sweetness, reminding them that they're alive. That's its purpose. That's why it exists. He hands you another quill, a particularly fine one, thin and tightly curled. Take this. Keep it. When you taste it later, remember the giant birds. Remember the cliffs and the snakes and the nests made of cinnamon. Remember that for thousands of years, people believed those stories because they wanted to believe them, because the truth was too ordinary, too simple. Spices aren't just flavors, my friend. They're dreams. They're the stories we tell ourselves about where wonderful things come from. You tuck the quill into your garment next to the peppercorn, and you realize you're building a collection, a small archive of the spices that are making their way into the Emperor's snack. The saffron, the cardamom, the pepper, the cinnamon. Each one a world unto itself, each one carrying the weight of its own story. The man returns to his peeling, and you sit for a while longer, watching the thin strips fall away, breathing in the warm sweetness that fills the air. Around you, The kitchen continues its endless motion, but here in this alcove, time seems to slow, seems to acknowledge that some things are worth lingering over. Eventually you rise, brushing stray bits of bark from your clothing, and the man looks up one last time. "One more thing," he says. "About the giant birds. The Greeks weren't entirely wrong. There are birds on Serendib, large birds with powerful wings. They don't build nests out of cinnamon, but they do something else. They carry seeds. They fly from forest to forest, dropping cinnamon seeds in new places, helping the trees spread. Without them, the cinnamon groves would be smaller, more isolated. So maybe the story was wrong in the details but right in spirit. Maybe the birds really do have something to do with where cinnamon comes from." He winks, and you leave him to his work, carrying with you the image of giant birds soaring over an island you've never seen, dropping seeds that will become the most sought-after spice in the world. You wander from the cinnamon seller's alcove with the taste still warm on your tongue and find yourself in a part of the kitchen you haven't explored before, a narrow corridor lined with small storage rooms where the air grows thicker and more fragrant with each step. The sounds of the main kitchen fade behind you, replaced by something quieter, more intimate, the occasional rustle of cloth or the soft thud of a sack being shifted. You're about to turn back when a new aroma stops you, sharp and penetrating, so distinct it seems to have edges. It's cloves. You know without being told, because nothing else smells quite like this, like warmth and medicine and something almost painful at the back of the throat. You follow the scent to a small room where a single figure sits cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by sacks that gape open to reveal their contents. Thousands upon thousands of dark brown buds, each one shaped like a tiny nail, each one radiating that impossible aroma into the close air. The figure looks up, and you see that it's a young woman, perhaps 20, with eyes that seem too old for her face. She's holding a single clove between thumb and forefinger, turning it slowly, studying it as if it contains the secrets of the universe. "You feel it too," she says. "It's not a question." "Feel what?" "The weight." She holds out the clove, and you take it, surprised by how heavy it feels for something so small. Not physical weight. The other kind. The weight of everything it took to get here. You nod, because you do feel it now, the same sensation you experienced with the saffron and the cardamom and the pepper and the cinnamon. Each spice carries its own gravity, its own pull on your attention, its own story that demands to be told. "Sit," she says, and you sit, because by now you know the drill. She gestures at the sacks around her, at the sea of cloves that surrounds you both. "Do you know where these come from?" You shake your head, and she smiles, a small sad smile that doesn't reach her eyes. No one does. That's the point. That's the secret they've been keeping for longer than anyone remembers. The cloves come from somewhere, someplace, but no one who isn't from that place knows where it is. And the people who are from there, the ones who grow the cloves and harvest them and dry them in the sun, they're not telling. She picks up a handful of cloves and lets them trickle back into the sack, a sound like heavy rain. There are islands, far to the east, beyond even Serendib, beyond the lands the Portuguese have mapped and claimed. 5 small islands, volcanic, with mountains that catch the clouds and soil that grows things found nowhere else on Earth. The people there have been growing cloves for thousands of years, trading them with anyone who could reach their shores, but never letting anyone know exactly where those shores were. The Spice Islands, you say, because you've heard rumors, whispers of a place so remote, so carefully hidden, that it exists more in story than in geography. The Spice Islands, she confirms. Though the people who live there call them something else, something in their own language that means something like the 5 Sisters or the mountains that smoke. The Arabs who trade with them call them the Moluccas. And the Portuguese, now that they've found the sea route to India, are desperate to find them too. She leans forward, her voice dropping. They've been sending expeditions for decades, trying to locate the islands, trying to claim the clove trade for themselves. They've captured sailors and tortured them for information. They've followed Arab ships and lost them in the maze of islands. They've drawn maps based on rumors and guesswork, each one less accurate than the last. And still, the secret holds. Still, the cloves arrive in the ports of India and no one can say exactly where they came from. You look at the clove in your hand, at its 4 points, its rough texture, its almost oily sheen. How do they do it? How do they keep it secret? The monsoon, she says simply. The cloves grow on islands that can only be reached during certain months, when the winds blow from the west. The ships that go there leave in April, carrying trade goods, and they return in October or November, carrying cloves. Anyone who tried to follow them would have to wait months for the right winds, and by then the trail would be cold. Anyone who tried to sail there at the wrong time would be stranded, or worse, caught by the currents that sweep ships onto reefs or into the open ocean where no one returns. She takes the clove back from you and holds it up to the light. And even if you found the islands, even if you landed on their shores, you'd still have to deal with the people who live there. They're not simple savages waiting to be conquered. They have kings and armies and trading networks that stretch across the eastern seas. They've been dealing with foreign merchants for centuries, and they know how to protect what's theirs. The Portuguese may have cannons, but the islanders have something more valuable. They have the cloves. And they know that as long as they control the source, the world will come to them. She places the clove carefully back in the sack, arranging it with the others as if it matters where each one lies. My father was a sailor, she says quietly. He made the voyage to the Spice Islands 3 times, carrying rice and cloth and bringing back cloves and nutmeg. He told me stories about the islands, about the mountains that smoke and the trees that grow only there and the people who live in houses built on stilts over the water. He said the air itself smells like cloves, that you can taste it on your tongue from miles offshore, that the whole island is perfumed with the spice that makes it rich. She falls silent, and you wait, because you sense there's more. The last time he sailed, she continues, was 4 years ago. The ship never returned. Maybe it was storms, maybe pirates, maybe the Portuguese finally found their way and decided that anyone trading with the islands without their permission deserved to die. I don't know. I'll never know. All I have is this. She reaches into her clothing and pulls out a small cloth bag, opening it to reveal a single clove, larger than the others, darker, more perfect. He brought this back from his second voyage. Said it was the finest clove he'd ever seen, that the Sultan of the Islands had given it to him personally as a gift. He told me to keep it, to remember that somewhere in the world there's a place where cloves grow like grass, where you can pick them by the handful and the trees keep producing year after year. You look at the clove, at the care with which she holds it, and you understand that this tiny bud contains not just the flavor of distant islands but the memory of a father, the hope of his return, the grief of his loss. Historians still argue, she says, her voice steady now, whether the Spice Islands were ever truly secret, or whether the traders who controlled the clove trade simply made everyone believe they were. Some say the islands were always known, that the Arabs had maps and the Chinese had visited centuries before, that the secrecy was just a story to drive up prices. Others insist that the islands were genuinely hidden, that the people who lived there went to extraordinary lengths to keep their location secret, that the cloves really did come from nowhere, from the edge of the world. She tucks the bag back into her clothing, close to her heart. I don't know which is true. I don't think it matters anymore. The Portuguese are getting closer every year. They'll find the islands eventually, and then the secret will be gone, and cloves will become just another spice, just something you buy in the market without thinking about where it came from. But for now, for this moment, the secret holds. For now, every clove in this room is still a mystery, still a story, still a connection to somewhere most people will never see. She looks at you, and her eyes are dry but somehow full of tears. You're going to taste the Emperor's snack tonight. aren't you? You're going to experience all these spices together, in whatever dish is having prepared. When you do, remember this. Remember that among those flavors, there will be cloves from islands so remote that most maps don't show them. Remember that someone's father sailed into the unknown to bring them here. Remember that every taste carries a story, and every story carries a cost. You nod, because there's nothing else to do, because she's right and you know it, and the weight of that knowledge settles on your shoulders like a physical thing. I should go, you say, though you don't want to, though you'd rather stay here in this small room surrounded by the scent of cloves and the presence of this woman who has lost everything and still holds on. Yes, she says. You should. The Emperor's snack is almost ready, and you'll want to be there when it's assembled. That's where the real magic happens, when all these separate stories come together into one. You rise, and she returns to her cloves, turning them over, studying them, keeping watch over the last secrets of a world that's about to change forever. You leave her there and walk back toward the main kitchen, the scent of cloves following you like a ghost, like a promise, like a memory of islands you'll never see. You step back into the main kitchen and the noise hits you like a wave, the clang of metal and the shout of orders and the constant sizzle of things hitting hot oil. The cloves still linger in your nose, but they're quickly overwhelmed by a dozen other scents, each one competing for your attention. You press yourself against a wall and just watch for a moment, trying to orient yourself in this chaos, when something makes you cough. It's a sharp, acrid smoke, different from the usual kitchen haze, and it's coming from a corner where a man is tending a small clay oven. He's adding something to a pot, something that releases puffs of irritant smoke with each addition, and you can see the other cooks giving him a wide berth, their eyes watering as they pass. You approach cautiously, your own eyes already starting to burn, and peer over his shoulder at what's in the pot. It's red. Deep, vivid red, like nothing you've ever seen in food before. The man is stirring a thick paste that seems almost to glow in the lamplight, and every time the spoon moves, another puff of that acrid smoke rises. You cough again, and he looks up, grinning at your discomfort. Too much for you, he asks, his voice cheerful. Don't worry, you get used to it. Eventually. What is it? You ask, wiping your eyes. This. He holds up a small dried pod, deep red and slightly curved, with smooth skin that shines in the light. This is the devil's own spice. This is what happens when you mix fire with food and let it loose on the world. The Portuguese call it pimento, because they think it's related to pepper. It's not. Pepper is gentle compared to this. Pepper is a warm bath. This is a bonfire. He drops another pod into the pot, and the smoke that rises makes you step back involuntarily. He laughs, a sound that turns into a cough, and stirs his paste with renewed energy. Where did it come from? You ask, because you've never seen anything like this, never tasted anything that burns the way this smoke burns your eyes. That's the best part, he says. No one knows. Not really. It appeared a few decades ago, on ships that came from the west, from across the ocean. The Portuguese brought it, along with 100 other strange things, and at first no one knew what to make of it. Some people thought it was poisonous, because it burned so fiercely. Others thought it must be medicine, because surely nothing that strong could be meant for mere pleasure. He scoops a tiny amount of the red paste onto his finger and holds it out to you. Taste. Just a little. Just the tip of your tongue. You hesitate, because everything you know about this kitchen tells you that accepting unknown substances from strangers is a terrible idea. But you've come this far, have tasted saffron and cardamom and pepper and cinnamon and cloves, and something in you needs to know what this red fire tastes like. You lean forward and touch your tongue to the paste. For a moment, nothing. Then the burning starts. It's like nothing you've ever experienced, a heat that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, spreading across your tongue and up into your palate and down your throat, leaving a trail of fire in its wake. Your eyes water, your nose runs, and you gasp for air, but the burning only intensifies. The man watches you with amusement, handing you a cup of something cool that you drink without asking what it is. The coolness helps, but the burning lingers, a memory of fire that refuses to fade. That, the man says, is chili, the most dangerous thing in this kitchen, and the most beloved. The emperor himself is addicted to it, though he'd never admit it. He claims it clears the mind, sharpens the senses, prepares him for the business of ruling. I think he just likes the pain. You wipe your eyes and look at the pot with new respect, at the innocent-looking red pods floating in the bubbling paste. You said it came from across the ocean. From where? From what land? The man shrugs. The Portuguese say it comes from a place called the West Indies, which is not the same as the India we know, though the name would suggest otherwise. They say there's a whole continent there, a world of land and people that no one in Europe knew existed until a few decades ago. They say the chili grows there like weeds, that the people who live there have been eating it for thousands of years, that they use it in everything, that they've built entire cuisines around its fire. He stirs his paste, watching the red swirl and merge. Historians still argue whether the chili was brought here deliberately, as a trade good, or whether it was an accident, a stowaway on ships that were carrying other things. Some say the Portuguese recognized its value immediately, saw that it could be sold as a cheaper alternative to pepper, and started cultivating it in their colonies. Others claim it spread by accident, that seeds got mixed in with other cargo, that birds carried them inland, that no one really intended for chili to become what it has become. And what has it become? You ask. He gestures broadly at the kitchen around you. Look. Just look. How many dishes do you see that don't contain chili? How many cooks aren't using it in some form? It's been here for barely a generation, and already it's everywhere. It's in the meat dishes and the vegetable dishes and the rice dishes and the snacks. It's in the food of the rich and the food of the poor. It's become so common, so ordinary, that most people have already forgotten it wasn't always here. He's right. You realize. As you scan the kitchen, you see chili in various forms everywhere. Here a paste, there a powder, here whole dried pods hanging from hooks, there fresh green ones being chopped for a curry. It's as if this fire spice has always been part of the landscape, as natural as cardamom or pepper. The thing about chili, the man continues, is that it doesn't just add heat. It changes everything it touches. It wakes up flavors that were sleeping. It makes other spices taste more like themselves. A dish with chili isn't just spicier than a dish without it. It's more alive, more present, more immediate. The emperor understands this, even if he can't explain it. That's why his favorite snack includes chili, just a touch, just enough to remind him that he's alive. He adds another spoonful of his paste to a small bowl that's been sitting nearby, and you see that the bowl contains other things, pale cream and crushed nuts and a hint of green that might be cardamom. The chili paste swirls into the mixture, turning it pink, then deeper red, until the whole bowl glows with a warm, inviting color. There, he says, satisfied. That's the balance. Not too much, not too little. Just enough to make you notice, not enough to make you suffer. The emperor will taste that and know that the cook understands him, understands that he wants to feel something without being overwhelmed. He sets down his spoon and looks at you directly. You're wondering, I can tell. You're wondering how something so foreign, so completely alien to this land, could become so essential so quickly. You're wondering what it means that the emperor's favorite snack, the thing he eats when he wants to be comforted and challenged at the same time, contains a spice that didn't exist here when he was born. You nod, because he's right, because you are wondering exactly that. It means, he says slowly, that the world is changing. It means that the oceans are no longer barriers but highways, that things can travel from one side of the earth to the other in a single lifetime. It means that what we think of as ours, as native, as traditional, is always shifting, always absorbing new things, always becoming something different. The chili came from across the ocean, but now it's ours. Now it's as Mughal as the emperor himself. And in another generation, no one will remember that it was ever any different. He hands you the bowl, warm in your palms, the red paste swirling hypnotically within. Take this to the head cook. Tell him it's ready. And when you taste the emperor's snack tonight, remember that the fire on your tongue came from a world you've never seen, carried by men you'll never meet, and that it's now as much a part of this place as the soil under your feet. You take the bowl and walk toward the main part of the kitchen, the bowl warm in your hands, the memory of the chili's burn still lingering on your tongue. Behind you, the man returns to his pots, and the smoke of 100 chilies continues to rise, filling the kitchen with the scent of the new world, of distant continents and unknown peoples, of a future that's arriving faster than anyone can comprehend. You carry the bowl of chili paste through the kitchen, navigating between cooks and servants and the constant motion of 100 meals being prepared simultaneously. The bowl is warm, almost hot, and the aroma rising from it makes your eyes water slightly, a reminder of the fire contained within that innocent-looking red swirl. You find the head cook exactly where you left him, at the low table surrounded by ingredients, and he takes the bowl from you without acknowledgement, his attention already fixed on the next phase of construction. But you don't leave. You stand at the edge of his workspace and watch, because something is happening here, something you need to understand. The head cook's hands move with a precision that seems almost mechanical, adding pinches of this and spoonfuls of that, tasting occasionally from a small silver spoon, adjusting, balancing, creating. And as you watch, you begin to notice patterns, relationships, a kind of grammar in the way he combines ingredients. 2 small bowls sit before him, their contents seemingly identical, pale brown powders that could be anything. But he treats them differently, reaching first for one, then the other, never confusing them, never hesitating over which is which. You lean closer, trying to see what distinguishes them, and he notices your attention. "Cumin," he says, tapping the first bowl. "And coriander." He taps the second. The yin and yang of this kitchen. The foundation on which everything else is built. You look at the 2 powders, trying to see the difference, but they appear identical to your untrained eye. The head cook smiles, a rare expression that transforms his usually stern face. "You can't tell them apart by looking," he says. "Not once they're ground. But you can tell by smelling, by tasting, by knowing what each one does. Cumin is earth, is warmth, is the smell of the soil after rain. Coriander is brightness, is citrus, is the green of new growth. They're opposites, but they need each other. One without the other is incomplete." He dips his finger into the cumin and holds it out. You taste, and he's right, it's warm and earthy, almost nutty, with a complexity that lingers on your tongue. Then the coriander, which is completely different, bright and slightly sweet, with a hint of lemon that cleanses your palate after the cumin's depth. "Together," he says, mixing a pinch of each in his palm, "they become something new, something that is neither one nor the other but both at once. This is the foundation of almost every dish in this kitchen. This is the grammar that allows all the other spices to speak." He adds the mixture to a larger bowl where other ingredients are already waiting, and you watch as the pale brown powders disappear into a creamier base, becoming invisible but somehow present, somehow essential. "Cumin came from the west," he continues, working as he talks. "From Persia, from the lands beyond the mountains. It traveled with the armies and the traders and the migrating peoples, carried in saddlebags and ship holds, planted in new soils until it became as native here as anywhere. The poets say that cumin is the memory of home, that its warmth reminds exiles of the kitchens they left behind. The emperor's ancestors carried cumin with them when they came from Central Asia, and they planted it in the gardens of their new kingdom, and now it grows everywhere, so common that no one remembers it was ever foreign. He reaches for another ingredient, a small heap of pale seeds that look almost like tiny grains of rice. Coriander is older here. It grew in this land before anyone remembers, before the first empires rose, before the Aryans came with their horses and their gods. The people of this subcontinent have been eating coriander for longer than they've had writing, longer than they've had cities, longer than they've had names for themselves. It's in the oldest recipes, the ones passed down from mother to daughter since before history began. He crushes some of the seeds between his fingers, releasing a fragrance that is somehow both familiar and strange, like something you've always known but never named. And yet coriander and cumin are always together, always paired, always balancing each other. It's as if the universe decided that these two, one from far away and one from here, one from the conquerors and one from the conquered, needed to be united. As if their combination represents something deeper, something about the nature of this place, this empire, this moment in time. You think about what he's saying, about the way two spices from different worlds have become inseparable, about how their combination is now more important than either alone. It feels like a metaphor for something larger, something about the Mughal Empire itself, about the blending of Persian and Indian traditions that defines this court and this culture. Historians still argue, the head cook says, echoing a phrase you've heard multiple times tonight, whether the distinctive flavor of Mughal cuisine came from the Central Asian conquerors or from the Indian subjects. Some say it was the Persians who brought sophistication, who elevated simple cooking into an art. Others insist it was the Indians who contributed depth, who added the complex spice blends that make Mughal food unique. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in between, in the mixing, in the combination, in the moment when cumin met coriander and neither was ever the same. He gestures at the bowls around him, at the dozens of spices arranged in careful order. Every spice in this kitchen has its own story, its own origin, its own journey. But the real magic happens when they meet. When cumin meets coriander, when cardamom meets saffron, when chili meets the cool cream that tames its fire. That's where flavor lives, not in individual spices but in their conversations, their arguments, their reconciliations. He takes a small pan and sets it over a low flame, adding a spoonful of ghee that melts instantly into liquid gold. Then he reaches for whole spices, cumin seeds and coriander seeds, and drops them into the hot fat. The sizzle is immediate, and the aroma that rises makes your mouth water involuntarily. The seeds crackle and pop, releasing their essential oils into the ghee, transforming the clear liquid into something infused with the very soul of the spices. Listen, the head cook says. Listen to the sound they make. That's the sound of flavor being born. That's the moment when potential becomes actual, when what was hidden becomes revealed. In a few seconds, those seeds will be spent, their oils transferred to the ghee, their work complete. But for now, for this moment, they're singing. They're telling you that something wonderful is about to happen. He adds other things to the pan, ginger and garlic and green chilies, each one releasing its own sizzle, its own contribution to the symphony. Then he pours the contents of the pan into the larger bowl, and the heat of the spice ghee wakes up everything it touches, blending and melding and creating something entirely new. You watch, transfixed, as the head cook works, his hands moving with a rhythm that seems almost musical. He adds yogurt, then more spices, then a handful of chopped herbs, then a squeeze of lime. Each addition is measured, considered, purposeful. Nothing is random. Nothing is accidental. This is cooking as conversation, as composition, as art. And at the center of it all, the cumin and coriander remain, the foundation on which everything else is built. They're invisible now, lost in the complexity of the final dish, but you know they're there. You know that without them, Without this ancient pairing, this meeting of foreign and native, invader and invaded, nothing else would be possible. The head cook lifts the bowl and holds it out to you. "Taste," he says. "Taste and tell me what you hear." You dip a clean finger into the mixture and bring it to your lips. The flavor is overwhelming, complex beyond anything you've experienced tonight. There's heat from the chili, coolness from the yogurt, brightness from the lime, depth from a dozen other spices you can't identify. But underneath it all, supporting everything else, is that warm, earthy, bright, citrusy foundation. Cumin and coriander, speaking together, telling their ancient story of migration and mixing, of conquest and accommodation, of two worlds becoming one. You look at the head cook, and he nods, satisfied with what he sees in your expression. "Now you understand," he says. "Now you know why this kitchen exists, why the emperor demands the finest spices from every corner of his empire and beyond. It's not just about flavor. It's not just about pleasure. It's about this, about the moment when everything comes together, when all the separate stories become one story, when the past and present and future meet on a single tongue." He takes the bowl back and adds one final ingredient, a pinch of something dark and fragrant that you don't recognize. Then he covers the bowl and sets it aside, and you know that the emperor's snack is one step closer to completion, one step closer to the moment when all these spices, all these stories, will become something that exists for a few minutes and then is gone forever. The head cook covers the bowl and turns away, his attention already moving to the next phase of preparation, and you find yourself once again adrift in the kitchen's endless motion. But before you can decide where to go next, a hand grips your arm and pulls you sideways into a small alcove hidden behind hanging sacks of grain. You stumble, catch yourself against a wall, and turn to face your captor. It's a man you haven't seen before, thin and nervous looking, with eyes that dart constantly toward the kitchen door as if expecting someone to burst through at any moment. He's holding something in his cupped hands, something he shields from view as carefully as if it were a live coal. "You're the one," he whispers. "The one who brought the saffron. The one who ate with the emperor." You nod, because denying it seems pointless, and he thrusts his hands toward you, opening them just enough to reveal what he's carrying. It's a nutmeg. You know immediately, though you've never seen one before, because nothing else looks quite like this. A small brown sphere, slightly wrinkled, with a rough texture that catches the light. It's unremarkable, really, just a seed the size of a small plum, but the man holds it as if it were the Koh-i-Noor diamond itself. "Do you know what this is?" he asks, his voice still a whisper. "Nutmeg," you say, and he flinches as if you've shouted. "Quiet," he hisses. "Quiet. You never know who's listening." He glances toward the door again, then back at you. "Yes, nutmeg. But not just any nutmeg. This one came from the islands. From the same islands as the cloves, but from a different part, a place so secret that even the clove traders don't know exactly where it is. The Bandas, they call them. The Nutmeg Islands." He opens his hands fully, and you see that the nutmeg is wrapped in something, a thin network of red fibers that cling to its surface like a second skin. "Mace," he says, following your gaze. "That's mace. It's another spice, completely different from the nutmeg, though it comes from the same fruit. The red covering is dried and sold separately, worth almost as much as the nutmeg itself. One fruit, two spices. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand the value of that?" You nod, though you're not sure you do understand. Not really. The man seems to sense your confusion and sighs, settling onto a sack of grain and gesturing for you to do the same. "Sit," he says. "I'll explain. But quickly. I can't stay here long." You sit, and he begins to talk, his words tumbling out in a rush. The nutmeg grows only on a few islands, tiny specks in a vast ocean, surrounded by reefs and dangerous currents and people who will kill anyone who tries to land without permission. For thousands of years, that was enough to keep it secret. The traders who brought nutmeg to the world would never say where it came from, would invent stories about its origins, would do anything to protect the source. Because as long as the source was secret, they controlled the supply. As long as they controlled the supply, they could name their price. He turns the nutmeg over in his hands, studying it with an intensity that borders on reverence. And the price was high. Higher than gold, in some places. In Europe, nutmeg was worth its weight in silver, sometimes more. People believed it could cure plague, could ward off evil spirits, could do things that no ordinary spice could do. They paid fortunes for a single nutmeg, and they never knew where it came from. He looks up at you, and his eyes are wild. But now the Portuguese are looking. They've heard rumors about the Nutmeg Islands, just as they've heard rumors about the Clove Islands. They're sending ships, sending spies, trying to find the source. And when they do, when they finally locate those tiny specks in the ocean, everything will change. The nutmeg will no longer be a secret. The price will fall. The traders who have controlled it for centuries will lose everything. He holds the nutmeg out to you, and you take it, feeling its weight, its warmth, its impossible concentration of value and danger. The mace clings to its surface, a red netting that seems almost alive. How did you get this? You ask. He glances toward the door again, then leans closer. A sailor brought it. A friend of a friend. Someone who'd been on a ship that made it to the islands before the Portuguese could stop them. He smuggled it past the patrols, past the customs officials, past everyone who would have taken it from him. He gave it to me because he owed me a debt, and now I'm giving it to you because I need you to understand. Understand what? Understand that this is what they're fighting for. This tiny seed, this brown lump, is worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. And it grows on islands so small, so remote, that a single ship could control the entire supply. The Portuguese know this. The Dutch are starting to know it too. Soon everyone will know it, and then the real wars will begin. He takes the nutmeg back, wraps it carefully in a piece of cloth, and presses it into your hands. Keep this. Hide it. When you leave here, take it with you. And when you taste the Emperor's snack tonight, remember that somewhere in this dish, there will be nutmeg. Just a pinch, just a hint, because it's too valuable to use more. But it will be there, and it will have come from islands so secret that most people don't believe they exist. You tuck the nutmeg into your garment, next to the peppercorn and the cinnamon quill and all the other treasures you've accumulated tonight. It feels heavier than it should, weighted with the knowledge of what it represents. Historians still argue, the man says, echoing the phrase you've come to recognize, whether the nutmeg trade was ever truly a secret, or whether the stories of hidden islands were just a way to keep prices high. Some say the islands were always known, that the traders just pretended they were hidden to create mystique. Others insist the secrecy was real, that generations of sailors died protecting the location, that the Nutmeg Islands were the best-kept secret in human history. He stands, brushing dust from his clothes. I don't know which is true. I don't think it matters. What matters is that this nutmeg exists, that it came from somewhere, that it traveled across oceans to reach this kitchen. What matters is that when the Emperor tastes it, he'll be tasting something that most people will never experience, something that represents everything that makes this empire possible. The ability to reach across oceans and bring back the rarest, most precious things the world has to offer. He moves toward the door, then pauses, looking back at you. One more thing. The nutmeg you're holding? It came from a tree that was planted by a bird. The birds on those islands eat the nutmeg fruit and carry the seeds to new places, dropping them where new trees can grow. Without the birds, there would be no nutmeg. Without the birds, The islands wouldn't exist as a source of spice. So when you taste that hint of nutmeg in the emperor's snack, remember the birds. Remember that something as simple as a bird eating fruit made all of this possible. He slips through the door and disappears into the kitchen, leaving you alone in the alcove with the weight of a nutmeg in your pocket and the image of birds carrying seeds across an ocean you'll never see. You sit for a long moment, breathing in the scents that surround you, feeling the pulse of the kitchen through the walls. Then you stand, adjust your garment, and step back into the chaos, carrying with you the secret of the Nutmeg Islands and the knowledge that somewhere in this vast kitchen, a bird-planted seed is about to become part of an emperor's pleasure. You emerge from the alcove with the nutmeg warm against your skin and immediately notice a change in the kitchen's atmosphere. The frantic pace of meal preparation has shifted into something calmer, more controlled, as if the entire space is holding its breath. Cooks stand at their stations with hands folded, waiting. Servants hover near doorways, alert for the next command. Even the fires seem to burn more quietly, their flames lower, their smoke less frantic. Something is about to happen. You can feel it in the air, in the way everyone's attention has turned toward a single point. A doorway curtained with heavy silk that you hadn't noticed before, at the far end of the kitchen. The curtain shimmers slightly, stirred by some invisible current, and as you watch, a hand parts the fabric and a figure steps through. She is old, older than anyone you've seen in the palace, with skin like crumpled parchment and eyes that hold centuries. She wears simple white, unadorned except for a single strand of pearls at her throat, and she carries in her hands a small crystal vial no larger than her thumb. The kitchen seems to bow toward her as she passes, cooks and servants and even the head cook himself inclining their heads in respect. She walks directly to the low table where the emperor's snack is being assembled and sets the vial down with infinite care. Then she looks up, and her eyes find you across the length of the kitchen. She beckons with one crooked finger, and you have no choice but to approach, feeling every eye in the room follow your progress. Up close, she is even more striking, her face a map of wrinkles that somehow makes her beautiful rather than old. She studies you for a long moment, then gestures at the crystal vial. "Do you know what this is?" Her voice is soft, almost a whisper, but it carries clearly in the silent kitchen. You shake your head, and she smiles, a small, private smile that reminds you of the emperor. "Rose water," she says. "The essence of 1,000 flowers, distilled into this tiny vessel. The most precious liquid in this kitchen, more valuable than any spice, because it cannot be grown or harvested or traded. It must be created, coaxed from petals by a process that takes days and yields almost nothing." She unstoppers the vial and holds it out to you, and the aroma that rises is so intense, so perfectly floral, that you feel tears prick at your eyes. It's the smell of gardens after rain, of love and loss and everything beautiful and fleeting. "The roses grow in a valley called Nuristan," she continues, "far to the north, where the mountains catch the clouds and the soil is rich with minerals washed down from the peaks. The valley is named for the light that fills it, a golden light that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. In spring, when the roses bloom, the entire valley turns pink, and the air becomes so thick with scent that you can taste it on your tongue." She takes the vial back and holds it up to the light, watching the liquid catch the flames and scatter them into rainbows. The harvest happens at dawn, before the sun can steal the oils from the petals. Thousands of workers move through the fields, picking each rose by hand, dropping them into baskets that are rushed to the distilleries before the flowers can wilt. There, they are layered with water in huge copper pots and heated slowly, gently, until the steam carries their essence into waiting receivers. Drop by drop, the rose water collects, each drop containing the soul of 100 flowers. You watch the liquid shift in its crystal prison, impossibly clear, impossibly fragrant, and you understand that you're looking at something that represents labor beyond counting, beauty beyond measure. "The emperor," she says, "loves roses more than any other flower. He has filled his palaces with them, planted gardens that stretch for miles, commissioned poets to write verses comparing his beloveds to their petals. But it's not the flowers themselves he loves most. It's this, their essence, the thing that remains after the petals have fallen and the blooms have faded. He believes that rose water purifies, that it cleanses not just the body but the spirit, that a dish touched with rose water becomes holy. She unstoppers the vial again and adds a single drop to the bowl containing the emperor's snack. The effect is immediate and transformative. The aromas of cumin and coriander, of chili and cardamom, of all the other spices that have gone into this dish, suddenly lift, become brighter, more distinct. The rose doesn't overwhelm them. It elevates them, frames them, makes them more themselves. Historians still argue, she says, echoing the familiar phrase, whether the use of rose water in cooking came to India with the Mughals or was already here, waiting to be discovered. Some say it was the Persians who brought the technique, who taught us to distill flowers and use their essence in food. Others insist that roses have been cultivated in this land for millennia, that the ancient texts mention rose-scented dishes long before any conqueror arrived. The truth, as always, is probably that both are right, that the love of roses is universal, that every culture that has encountered them has wanted to capture and preserve their beauty. She restoppers the vial and places it back on the table, but her eyes remain on you. You're wondering, she says, why I showed you this. Why I chose you, out of everyone in this kitchen, to explain the rose water to. The answer is simple. Because you're still seeing. Because after everything you've experienced tonight, after all the spices and stories and secrets, you're still looking at each new thing as if it matters. Most people stop seeing after a while. They become accustomed to wonder, take it for granted, forget that what surrounds them is extraordinary. You haven't. Not yet. And I wanted to show you one more extraordinary thing before you lose that ability. She reaches out and touches your cheek, a gesture so gentle it feels like a blessing. The emperor's snack will be served soon. You'll taste it, and it will be unlike anything you've ever experienced. But when you do, remember the rose water. Remember the valley where the roses grow, the workers who pick them at dawn, the copper pots where their essence is captured. Remember that this single drop, this tiny addition to a dish that will be consumed in minutes, represents months of labor, miles of travel, centuries of knowledge passed from mother to daughter across generations. She turns away, moving toward the curtained doorway from which she came, but pauses at the threshold to look back one last time. And remember this too, the emperor will taste that rose water and think of his gardens, of the poets who praise his beloveds, of everything beautiful and fleeting in his life. But he won't think of the valley, or the workers, or the centuries of knowledge. He won't think of where it came from or how it got here. That's the nature of power, of pleasure, of being the one for whom things are made. You, though, you'll know. You'll carry the story with you, and maybe, someday, you'll tell it to someone else. That's how the world works, after all. Not through emperors and armies, but through stories passed from one person to another, keeping alive what would otherwise be forgotten. She disappears through the curtain, and the kitchen slowly exhales, returning to its normal rhythm. Cooks resume their work, servants scurry about their duties, the fires regain their former energy. But you stand frozen for a long moment, breathing in the fading trace of rosewater, understanding that you've just been given a gift you can never repay. The rosewater's fragrance lingers in your nose long after the old woman has disappeared, a ghost of petals and gardens that seems to follow you as you move through the kitchen. You find yourself drawn toward a corner you haven't explored before, where the light burns brighter and the air feels somehow colder, despite the heat of the fires. A small table stands there, bare except for two small bowls and a figure seated behind them, waiting. The figure is a man, young, with the shaved head of a scholar and eyes that seem to look through you rather than at you. He wears the simple robes of a religious student, and his hands rest on the table before him, palms up, as if receiving an offering. As you approach, he gestures for you to sit across from him, and you do, because by now you've learned that when someone in this kitchen invites you to sit, you sit. You've tasted many things tonight, he says. His voice is calm, measured, the voice of someone accustomed to explaining difficult concepts. Saffron and cardamom, pepper and cinnamon, cloves and chili, cumin and coriander, nutmeg and rose. You've traveled across oceans and mountains, through wars and treaties, along trade routes stained with blood and gold. But you haven't yet tasted the most important thing in this kitchen. You haven't tasted the divine. He pushes one of the bowls toward you. Inside, nestled on a bed of rose petals, are small crystalline structures, some white, some pale yellow, some almost translucent. They glitter in the lamplight like frozen stars. Camphor, he says, and amber. Two substances that are not quite spices, not quite medicines, not quite anything the ordinary world has names for. They come from places so strange, so unlikely, that most people refuse to believe they exist. And yet here they are, in the Emperor's kitchen, about to become part of his favorite snack. He gestures for you to take one of the white crystals, and you do, holding it up to the light. It's cool to the touch, almost cold, and it seems to vibrate slightly against your skin. Camphor, he continues, comes from a tree that grows in the islands beyond Serendib, in the same mysterious east that gives us cloves and nutmeg. But it's not the wood or the bark or the fruit that yields camphor. It's the heart of the tree, the very center, where for centuries the essential oils have concentrated and crystallized into this solid form. To get camphor, you must cut down a tree that has been growing for 100 years, split it open, and scrape out the crystals from its core. Each crystal represents a century of growth, a century of the tree drawing life from soil and rain and sun, a century of waiting for this moment. He takes a crystal himself and holds it between thumb and forefinger. Now taste. Just a touch. Just enough to feel what camphor does. You touch the crystal to your tongue, and the sensation is unlike anything you've experienced tonight. It's cold, impossibly cold, as if you've put ice in your mouth, but it's not the cold of frozen water. It's a different kind of cold, a cold that seems to come from inside rather than outside, spreading through your mouth and up into your sinuses and down into your chest. For a moment, you feel as if you've stopped breathing, as if the camphor has frozen time itself. Then it passes, and you're left with a clean, medicinal taste, a clarity that makes everything else you've tasted seem muddy by comparison. That, the scholar says, is the taste of the divine, or as close as we can come in this world. Camphor is used in temples, burned as incense, offered to gods who are imagined to enjoy its purity. It's considered sacred because it leaves no residue, because it burns completely, because it transforms from solid to vapor without passing through any intermediate state. Like the soul, the mystics say, camphor leaves this world without leaving a trace. He pushes the second bowl toward you. This one contains pale yellow crystals, softer looking than the camphor, with a warm, almost honeyed glow. Amber, he says, or ambergris, to be precise, though most people just call it amber. This is stranger still, stranger than anything you've encountered tonight. It comes not from a tree or a plant or even from the land. It comes from the sea, from the belly of a creature so vast, so mysterious, that we have no name for it that isn't also a myth. He picks up a piece of amber and holds it out. This was once inside a whale. A living creature, larger than this kitchen, larger than any ship that sails the oceans. The whale produces this substance in its intestines, for reasons we don't fully understand, and occasionally it releases it into the sea, where it floats for years, sometimes decades, until it washes ashore on some distant beach. There, someone finds it, recognizes it for what it is, and sells it for its weight in gold. You take the amber, feeling its waxy smoothness, its unexpected warmth. It seems alive in a way the camphor didn't, as if it still carries something of the creature that produced it. The uses of amber are many, the scholar continues. In perfumery, it fixes scents, makes them last longer than they naturally would. In medicine, it's believed to cure everything from headaches to plague. In cooking, it adds a subtle warmth, a depth that no other spice can replicate. But its true value is stranger than any of these. Amber is valued because it comes from nowhere, because it appears on beaches without warning, because no one can predict when or where the next piece will be found. It's the most random, most unpredictable substance in the spice trade, and therefore the most precious. He watches you examine the amber, turning it over in your hands, feeling its impossible weight. Historians still argue, he says, whether the ancient traders who first sold amber knew where it came from. Some say they must have known, must have observed whales and made the connection. Others insist the secret was kept for millennia, that the origins of amber were as mysterious to the people who sold it as they are to us. The truth may be that some knew and some didn't, that the mystery was part of the value, that not knowing where something comes from makes it more precious, not less. He takes the amber back and places it carefully in its bowl, then does the same with the camphor. In a moment, he says, the head cook will add tiny amounts of these substances to the emperor's snack. Just a trace of camphor, for its cooling purity. Just a hint of amber, for its warm depth. Together, they will create something that neither could achieve alone. A flavor that is both hot and cold, both earthly and divine, both of this world and beyond it. The emperor will taste this and be reminded that he is mortal, that his empire will crumble, that his body will return to dust. And yet he will also be reminded that something in him, something essential, is pure and cold and eternal, like camphor burning without residue. He closes his eyes for a moment, and when he opens them, they seem to hold the same cold fire as the crystals on the table. You've been given a rare gift tonight, he says. You've tasted the ordinary spices that make up the material world. Now you've tasted the extraordinary substances that point beyond it. When you leave this kitchen, when you return to your ordinary life, you'll carry these tastes with you. And maybe, in moments of quiet, you'll remember that the world is stranger than it seems, that there are things in it that defy explanation, that even the most mundane meal can contain hints of the divine. He rises, gathering his bowls, and moves away into the kitchen's shadows. You sit for a long moment, your mouth still carrying the ghost of camphor's cold, your hands still warm from the amber's touch. Then you rise too, and walk back toward the heart of the kitchen, toward the place where all these impossible substances are about to become one. You walk back toward the head cook's table with the taste of camphor still cold on your tongue and the warmth of amber still lingering somewhere deeper, and you're so focused on processing what you've just experienced that you almost walk past a small doorway without noticing the figure standing in it. But you do notice, because the figure steps directly into your path, blocking your way with the casual authority of someone who owns the space they occupy. He's a merchant, you can tell immediately from his clothes, rich silken colors that would be garish anywhere but here, where they somehow seem appropriate. His fingers glitter with rings, his beard is oiled and perfumed, and his smile is the smile of someone who has spent a lifetime convincing people to want what is selling. You, he says, are the one I've been looking for. The one who carries spices in his clothing, who tastes everything, who has the emperor's ear for reasons no one quite understands. You start to protest, to explain that you don't have the emperor's ear, that you've spoken to him once, that you're nobody, but the merchant waves your objections away with a jeweled hand. Details, he says. Irrelevant details. What matters is that you're here, now, and that I have something to show you. Something that will change how you see everything you've experienced tonight. He gestures you through the doorway, and you find yourself in a small room that's clearly his temporary headquarters. Bundles of spices line the walls, sacks of pepper and cardamom, baskets of cinnamon and cloves, things you recognize and things you don't. In the center of the room, on a low table, sit two small piles of reddish threads that look almost identical. The merchant settles himself on a cushion and gestures for you to do the same. When you're both seated, he reaches out and takes a pinch from each pile, holding them up for your inspection. "What do you see?" he asks. You look carefully. The threads in his left hand are deep red, almost crimson, with delicate three-pronged ends. The threads in his right hand are a slightly brighter red, more orange, with the same general shape but somehow less refined. "Saffron, you say?" "Both of them." The merchant's smile widens. "Correct. And incorrect. Both are saffron." "Yes. But one is the true saffron, the Kashmiri saffron you carried earlier, the saffron that costs more than gold and travels across mountains to reach this kitchen. And the other." He pauses for effect. "The other is something else entirely. A rival. A pretender. A cheaper, brighter, more abundant version of the same thing, grown not in Kashmir but in a place you've never heard of, carried here by routes you can't imagine, sold to people who can't tell the difference." He holds out the brighter threads. "This is Spanish saffron, brought by the Portuguese from the other side of the world, from a land they call La Mancha, where the soil and sun produces saffron that is almost as good as the Kashmiri, and in some ways better. It's more consistent, more reliable, easier to grow in large quantities. And it's cheaper. Much cheaper." You take the Spanish saffron and examine it, comparing it to the Kashmiri thread still in the merchant's other hand. The difference is subtle but real. The Spanish saffron is brighter, more uniform, less complex in its coloration. It lacks the deep crimson of the Kashmiri, the almost purple tips that signal true quality. "The emperor," the merchant continues, "would never accept this. He knows Kashmiri saffron, has grown up with it, can detect the difference instantly. For him, Spanish saffron is an insult, a cheap imitation, a sign that someone is trying to cheat him. But for most people, for the ordinary buyers in the markets, for the cooks in lesser households, for anyone who can't afford the true Kashmiri, this is a gift. It brings the taste of saffron within reach of people who would never otherwise experience it." He sets both piles down and leans forward, his eyes intense. "And here's where it gets interesting. The Portuguese don't just sell Spanish saffron. They also sell Kashmiri saffron, when they can get it. They trade in both, play both sides, make money from the competition between them. They understand something that the old traders never did, that value is not fixed, that what something is worth depends on who wants it and why, that the same spice can be priceless in one context and ordinary in another." He reaches into a bag at his side and pulls out a small packet, wrapped in oiled cloth. "This is the gamble I mentioned. This is what I wanted to show you. Inside this packet is a mixture, half Kashmiri saffron, half Spanish. To most eyes, most noses, most tongues, it's indistinguishable from the pure Kashmiri. But it cost half as much to produce, which means twice the profit for whoever sells it." You stare at the packet, understanding what he's offering without him saying it directly. "You want me to help you sell this to the palace?" He laughs, a genuine laugh that fills the small room. "No, no, no. I don't need your help selling anything. I have buyers lined up from here to Baghdad. What I want is something simpler. I want you to understand. I want you to see that the spices you've been marveling at all night, the ones with their stories of distant lands and ancient secrets, are also commodities. They're also things that can be mixed and matched, adulterated and substituted, bought and sold like any other goods. The poetry doesn't change the economics." He rewraps the packet and tucks it away. Historians still argue whether the spice trade was driven more by genuine demand for flavor or by the profits to be made from adulteration. Some say the real money was always in stretching spices with cheaper alternatives, in selling mixtures that looked and tasted almost like the real thing. Others insist that most traders were honest, that the risks of getting caught were too high, that reputation mattered more than short-term gain. The truth, as always, is probably that both happened, that the spice trade was neither pure nor entirely corrupt, but something messier and more human. He leans back, studying you with those merchant's eyes that miss nothing. You've been collecting stories all night. Saffron from Kashmir, cardamom from the Malabar coast, pepper that launched empires, cinnamon guarded by myths, cloves from islands so secret they barely exist, chili from a world no one knew about, cumin and coriander that married conqueror and conquered, nutmeg carried in a bird's crop, rose water distilled from a valley of petals, camphor and amber from the edges of the divine. You've treated each one as sacred, as unique, as carrying weight of meaning beyond its physical form. He pauses, letting the silence stretch. But here's the question you haven't asked. Here's the question that separates the dreamers from the traders. What happens when you can't tell the difference? What happens when the Kashmiri saffron and the Spanish saffron look the same, smell the same, taste the same to all but the most discerning palates? What happens when the story becomes more valuable than the substance, when people are willing to pay for the idea of a thing rather than the thing itself? You don't have an answer, and he doesn't expect one. He reaches out and takes your hand, pressing the wrapped packet into your palm. Take this, he says. Not to use, not to sell, just to keep. As a reminder that the world is not as simple as the stories make it seem. The Emperor's snack tonight will contain true Kashmiri saffron, the best money can buy. But somewhere in this city, in 1,000 kitchens, cooks are using Spanish saffron, or mixtures, or things that aren't saffron at all, and telling themselves it doesn't matter, that the difference is too small to notice, that the story is what counts. And maybe they're right. Maybe the story is what counts. Maybe it always was. He releases your hand and waves toward the door. Go! The head cook is waiting for the final ingredients. The Emperor's snack is almost ready. And you, my friend, have one more lesson to learn before this night is over. You tuck the packet into your garment, next to all the other treasures you've accumulated, and walk back into the kitchen. Behind you, the merchant's laugh follows, not mocking, not cruel, just amused at the endless comedy of human desire and the spices that feed it. You step back into the main kitchen and immediately notice that something has shifted. The frantic energy of preparation has given way to a calmer, more anticipatory mood. Dishes are being arranged on massive silver platters, sauces are being poured into delicate bowls, breads are being stacked in towers that defy gravity. The Emperor's meal is almost ready, and the entire kitchen hums with the satisfaction of work completed. But your attention is drawn to a corner where something else is happening, something that doesn't look like cooking at all. A young woman sits on a low stool, surrounded by small baskets filled with green leaves and what look like tiny slivers of areca nut. Her hands move with practiced grace, folding and wrapping, creating small green packets that she arranges on a silver tray. As you watch, she reaches for a small pot and adds a pinch of something to each packet, something that releases a faint, complex aroma that reaches you even across the kitchen's distance. You approach, drawn by curiosity, and she looks up with a smile that seems to welcome your presence. "You've never seen this before," she says. It's not a question. You shake your head, and she gestures for you to sit beside her. Up close, you can see the contents of her baskets more clearly. Fresh beetle leaves, glossy and green, each one perfect and unblemished. Thin slices of areca nut, pale and slightly fibrous. A small pot of slaked lime, white as chalk. And another pot containing something darker, more mysterious, that releases that complex aroma you noticed earlier. "This is pan," she says, holding up one of the finished packets. "The Emperor's final course. Not a sweet, not a digestive, though it serves both purposes. Something else entirely. Something that has been part of life in this land for longer than anyone remembers." She unfolds the packet to show you its contents. A betel leaf spread with a thin paste of slaked lime, topped with slices of areca nut and a pinch of the dark mixture from the small pot. Then she refolds it with the same practiced motion, creating a neat green triangle. The betel leaf comes from the south, she says, from the same Malabar coast that gives us pepper and cardamom. It's grown in shaded gardens, protected from direct sun, watered by hand. Each leaf is picked individually, inspected for holes or blemishes, and transported in baskets lined with damp cloth to keep it fresh. By the time it reaches the palace, it's been handled by dozens of people, each one contributing to its journey. She holds up a slice of areca nut. This comes from the east, from the forests beyond Bengal, where the areca palm grows tall and straight. The nuts are harvested when ripe, split open, and the seeds are dried in the sun until they turn the color of pale wood. Then they're sliced thin, sometimes flavored with spices, sometimes left plain. Chewing them releases a mild stimulation, a gentle alertness that the emperor finds helpful for late-night conversations. But it's the small pot that draws your attention, the dark mixture that smells so complex. She sees you looking and smiles. Katha, she says. Katachu. Made from the heartwood of the acacia tree, boiled down until it becomes this dark paste. It's what gives pan its color, its astringency, its ability to stain the lips red. Without it, pan would be just leaves and nuts, pleasant but not memorable. With it, pan becomes something else, something that leaves its mark on those who consume it. She dips a tiny spoon into the pot and holds it out. You taste, and the astringency is immediate, drying your mouth, drawing your cheeks in, leaving behind a complex bitterness that somehow also carries sweetness underneath. The emperor, she continues, will take his pan after the snack, after the saffron and cardamom and all the other spices have done their work. He'll chew it slowly, thoughtfully, letting the flavors release in stages. First the coolness of the leaf, then the mild burn of the lime, then the stimulation of the areca, then the astringency of the katha. And finally, when all those have faded, he'll add one more thing. She reaches into a small box beside her and pulls out a handful of tiny silver spheres, each one no larger than a peppercorn. Fennel seeds. Coated in sugar, flavored with something else, I'm not allowed to say what. He'll add these at the end, when the pan's flavors have done their work, to freshen his breath and settle his stomach and prepare him for whatever comes next. She places a few of the silver spheres in your palm, and you taste one. The fennel is immediately recognizable, sweet and slightly licorice-like, but the sugar coating adds a pleasant crunch, and there's something else underneath, something floral and mysterious that you can't quite identify. Historians still argue, she says, whether pan originated in this land or was brought here from somewhere else. Some say it's been here since before history, that the ancient texts mention betel chewing as far back as records exist. Others insist it came from the east, from the islands beyond, carried by traders who brought it as a curiosity that became an obsession. The truth, as with so many things, is probably that it developed independently in multiple places, that humans everywhere discovered the pleasure of wrapping something stimulating in a leaf and chewing it. She returns to her work, folding packet after packet with the same precise motions, and you watch in silence, understanding that you're witnessing something ancient, something that connects this moment to countless moments before it. The emperor's favorite, she says quietly, not looking up, is a particular combination. Betel leaf from a village in the south that he refuses to name, areca nut flavored with cardamom, katha from a specific region in the east, and fennel seeds coated in sugar and rose water. He's tried other combinations, other variations, but he always returns to this one. He says it reminds him of his mother, though no one knows if that's true or just a story he tells. She finishes the last packet and arranges it on the tray, then sits back to admire her work. The tray holds perhaps 20 packets, each one identical, each one perfect. He'll share these, she says, with his advisors, his favorites, whoever happens to be with him when the meal ends. Chewing pan together is a form of bonding, of creating intimacy, of sharing something that is neither quite food nor quite medicine nor quite drug but partakes of all three. In the pauses between chews, conversations happen that wouldn't happen otherwise. Secrets are shared. Alliances are formed. The business of empire proceeds in ways that have nothing to do with official meetings and formal documents. She looks at you directly, and her eyes are knowing. You'll be there, I think. When he takes his pan, you'll be invited to share, to chew, to sit in silence or speak as the moment dictates. When that happens, remember what I've told you. Remember that this is not just about freshening breath or settling stomachs. This is about connection, about the simple human act of sharing something that stimulates and soothes at the same time. This is about the moments between moments, when empires are really built. She rises, taking the tray, and moves toward the curtained doorway where the emperor's food will be delivered. At the threshold, she pauses and looks back. And when you taste the fennel at the end, the sweet, cool fennel that clears your palate and prepares you for sleep or conversation or whatever comes next, remember that it too traveled. From somewhere in this vast empire, from fields you'll never see, from farmers you'll never meet. It too has a story. It too matters. She disappears through the curtain, and you're left alone with the scent of betel and areca and cather, with the memory of fennel sweetness on your tongue, with the understanding that the meal isn't over yet, that there's still one more course to come, one more spice to experience, one more story to hear. The kitchen falls silent. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of completion, of work finished, of hundreds of people holding their breath at once. You look around and see that every cook, every servant, every helper has stopped what they're doing and turned toward the center of the room, where the head cook stands behind the low table that holds the emperor's snack. It's ready. You move closer, drawn by something you can't resist, and as you approach you begin to understand what you're seeing. The snack is not one thing but many, arranged on a silver platter with the precision of a mapmaker plotting territories. There are small bowls of different preparations, each one distinct in color and texture, each one representing hours of labor and centuries of tradition. And in the center, the main event, a pale confection studded with pistachios and slivered almonds, glistening with ghee and infused with the essence of everything you've experienced tonight. The head cook looks up as you approach, and for the first time, he seems to see you not as an intruder but as a witness. This, he says, gesturing at the platter, is what it all comes to. Every spice you've encountered tonight, every story you've heard, every journey and secret and gamble, all of it has led to this moment. In a few minutes, this will be carried to the emperor, and he will taste it, and it will become part of him for the brief time it takes to digest. Then it will be gone, and the spices will have to begin their work all over again, in another dish, on another day. He begins to explain the assembly, pointing to each component in turn. The base is milk, reduced for hours until it becomes thick and sweet, almost solid. To this we add sugar, of course, but not too much, because the spices should speak for themselves. Then the cardamom, the queen, ground fresh this morning and added at the last moment to preserve its brightness. Then the saffron, steeped in warm milk until it releases its color and aroma, then stirred in so that it suffuses everything. He moves his hand to a small bowl containing a dark, fragrant paste. This is the pepper, the chili, the warming spices that remind the emperor he's alive. Just a touch, just enough to make itself known without overwhelming the more delicate flavors. The pepper from the Malabar coast, the chili from across the ocean, the cumin and coriander that ground everything in the earthiness of this land. Next, a bowl of pale yellow cream, studded with what look like tiny dark specks. The nutmeg, freshly grated, and the mace that surrounds it. 2 spices from one fruit, added separately to create complexity. And the cloves, just a hint, just enough to remind the emperor of islands he'll never see. Finally, a tiny crystal vial containing a liquid that catches the light and scatters it into rainbows. And this, the rose water. Added last, added gently, added with the understanding that it will transform everything it touches. Without this, the dish would be merely excellent. With this, it becomes something else, something that speaks not just to the body but to the spirit. He lifts the vial and adds its contents to the main dish, a few drops only, but the effect is immediate and transformative. The aroma that rises is the aroma of everything at once, of all the spices you've encountered tonight united into a single scent that is somehow more than the sum of its parts. You close your eyes and breathe, and in that breath you taste Kashmir and the Malabar coast, Serendib and the Spice Islands, the mountains and the oceans and the monsoon rains. You taste the labor of farmers and the courage of sailors, the secrets of traders and the greed of conquerors. You taste history itself, compressed into a single moment, a single scent, a single dish that will exist for minutes and then be gone forever. The head cook watches you with something like satisfaction. Now you understand. Now you see what I've been trying to show you all night. The spices are not just flavors. They're not just stories. They're the physical manifestation of everything that makes this empire possible. The trade routes and the wars, the alliances and the betrayals, the labor of millions and the genius of a few. When the emperor tastes this dish, he's tasting his own power. He's tasting the reach of his armies and the extent of his influence. He's tasting the world, reduced to a single bite. He begins to arrange the components on a larger platter, creating a composition that is almost too beautiful to eat. The main dish in the center, surrounded by smaller bowls of accompaniments, crushed pistachios, silvered almonds, a tiny dish of additional saffron threads for those who want more, another of ground cardamom for those who prefer its brightness. Historians still argue, he says, whether the Mughal emperors truly appreciated the spices they consumed, or whether they simply took them for granted as the spoils of power. Some say Akbar, the current emperor's grandfather, knew every spice by name and origin, could detect the slightest variation in quality, treated his kitchens as laboratories for the perfection of flavor. Others insist that the emperors were too removed from the sources, too insulated by wealth and power, to truly understand what they were eating. He looks at you directly. The truth, I suspect, is that it varies. Some emperors care, some don't. Some taste and know, others taste and simply consume. This emperor, the one you met, the one who shared his saffron with you, he cares. He knows. He understands that what his tasting represents not just pleasure but responsibility, not just flavor but the weight of empire. He steps back from the platter, satisfied with his work. A servant approaches, bows, and lifts the platter with infinite care. The entire kitchen watches as he carries it toward the curtained doorway, as he disappears through it, as the curtain falls back into place and the moment passes. And then, somehow, impossibly, the servant reappears. He walks directly to you, ignoring everyone else in the kitchen, and stops before you with the platter still in his hands. The emperor requests, he says, that you join him. He wishes to share this dish with someone who understands what it contains. Every eye in the kitchen turns to you. The head cook nods, once, a gesture that might be approval or might be simply acknowledgement. The servant waits, patient, holding the platter that contains the labor of hundreds and the stories of thousands. You reach into your garment and feel the treasures you've accumulated tonight. The peppercorn, the cinnamon quill, the nutmeg wrapped in its cloth, the packet of mixed saffron from the merchant, all the physical reminders of everything you've learned. You'll carry them with you. You realize. You'll carry them always. And then you follow the servant through the curtain, toward the emperor, toward the dish that contains the world, toward whatever comes next. You follow the servant through the curtain and into a passageway you don't recognize. your feet finding purchase on cool marble instead of the kitchen's rough stone. The servant walks ahead, the platter held steady in his hands, and you follow in silence, your heart beating somewhere in your throat. The passage opens into a courtyard, open to the night sky, where fountains whisper and the stars hang so low you feel you could reach up and touch them. The emperor sits on a low divan beneath a canopy of silk, his legs crossed, his hands resting on his knees. He's changed from the simple white cotton he wore earlier into robes of deep blue embroidered with gold, and his emerald ring catches the light of the oil lamps that surround him. As you approach, he looks up and smiles, that same private smile that transforms his face from imperial mask to something almost human. "Come," he says. "Sit. Eat with me again." You sit across from him, and the servant places the platter between you before withdrawing silently into the shadows. For a long moment, neither of you moves. The emperor simply looks at the dish, at the careful arrangement of components, at the main confection glowing pale in the lamplight. "Do you know his name?" the emperor asks quietly. "The man who made this? The head cook who spent hours assembling these flavors, who selected each spice, who balanced each element against the others?" You realize you don't. In all your time in the kitchen, through all the stories and lessons and encounters, you never learned his name. "No one does," the emperor says. "That's the way of things. The people who create the most beautiful, most meaningful things are often forgotten, while those who simply consume them are remembered. I will be remembered, for good or ill, because I rule an empire. But the man who made this dish, who spent his life mastering the art of combining flavors, who could probably tell you more about the nature of pleasure than any philosopher, his name will disappear. In a generation, no one will know he existed." He reaches out and takes a small portion of the main dish, lifting it on a silver spoon and bringing it to his lips. He closes his eyes as he tastes, and you watch his face move through a series of expressions you can't quite read. Then he opens his eyes and nods, satisfied. "Perfect," he says. "As always. He never disappoints." He gestures for you to taste, and you do, taking a small portion on your own spoon and bringing it to your mouth. The flavor that floods your senses is so complex, so layered, that for a moment you can't process it at all. Then slowly, gradually, you begin to distinguish the elements. The sweetness of the reduced milk, the brightness of the cardamom, the floral depth of the saffron, the warmth of the pepper and chili, the earthiness of the cumin and coriander, the mysterious complexity of the nutmeg and cloves, the ethereal perfume of the rosewater. And underneath it all, something else, something you can't name, something that might be the campher's cold purity or the amber's warm depth or simply the knowledge of everything that went into creating this single bite. "You understand now," the emperor says. "I can see it in your face. You understand that this is not just food. This is everything. This is every trade route and every war, every farmer and every sailor, every secret and every gamble, all of it reduced to something that can be held on a spoon and tasted for a few seconds before it's gone." He takes another bite, and you do the same, and for a while you eat in silence, sharing this dish that contains the world. The night air is cool on your skin, the fountains whisper their endless song, and somewhere in the distance a nightingale begins to sing. "The Mughal Empire," the emperor says finally, "will not last forever. Nothing does. The spices you've encountered tonight, the ones that have traveled so far and cost so much, they'll still be here after we're gone. They'll still be traded and tasted and valued, long after my name is just a footnote in some historian's book. That's the thing about spices. They outlast empires." He sets down his spoon and looks at you directly. "My name is Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar. Most people just call me Akbar. I am the third emperor of the Mughal dynasty, the ruler of more people than I can count, the builder of cities and the patron of artists and the commander of armies that stretch to the horizon. And tonight, I am a man sharing a meal with a stranger, because sometimes that's all an emperor wants to be. He reaches into a small box beside him and withdraws something, holding it out to you. It's a single saffron thread, the same deep crimson you carried into the kitchen what feels like a lifetime ago. Take this, he says. Keep it. When you taste it someday, remember this night. Remember the kitchen and the spices and the stories. Remember that you were here, that you saw, that you understood. And if you ever have children, tell them. Tell them about the night you spent in the emperor's kitchen, learning the secrets of the spice trade. Tell them about the saffron from Kashmir and the cardamom from the Malabar coast, about the pepper that launched empires and the cinnamon guarded by myths, about the cloves from islands so secret they barely exist and the chili from a world no one knew about. Tell them about the cumin and coriander that married conqueror and conquered, about the nutmeg carried in a bird's crop, about the rose water distilled from a valley of petals, about the camphor and amber from the edges of the divine. You take the saffron thread, feeling its impossible lightness, its impossible weight. You tuck it into your garment with all the other treasures you've accumulated, and you know that you'll never lose it, that you'll carry it always, that it will outlast you just as spices outlast empires. The emperor rises, and you rise with him. The night has grown late, the stars have shifted in their courses, and somewhere in the palace, people are beginning to stir for the dawn prayer. Your time here is ending. Go, the emperor says. The guards will escort you out. And when you're gone, when you're back in your own life, in your own time, remember this: the world is larger than you think. It contains more wonders than you can imagine. And some of them, the best of them, can be held in the palm of your hand and tasted on your tongue. He turns away, walking slowly toward the shadows at the edge of the courtyard, and you watch him go, this man who rules millions, this builder of dreams in stone and connoisseur of fleeting pleasures. He pauses at the threshold and looks back once, that private smile on his face. Sweet dreams, he says. May your sleep be filled with the scent of spices. And then he's gone, and you're alone with the fountains and the stars and the fading taste of the emperor's favorite snack on your tongue. The night is over. The spices have done their work. And somewhere in the kitchen below, the fires are being banked and the cooks are resting, preparing for another day of transforming the world into flavor. You walk toward the waiting guards, your garment heavy with treasures, your mind full of stories, your heart full of something you can't quite name. Behind you, the palace sleeps, and within it, an emperor dreams of saffron fields and cardamom groves, of pepper vines and cinnamon forests, of all the spices that make his world possible. And you carry it all with you. The stories, the secrets, the tastes, the knowledge that every spice, every flavor, every bite contains within it the labor of millions and the dreams of generations. The guards lead you through the gates, and you step out into the city, into the cool night air, into a world that will never look quite the same again.